from the first cause were not controlled. Do you mind? Do you mind? You're being abusive. You're being abusive. Can you please go away? What we have is we have over nearly 80,000 words being revealed over 23 years, often consequential, where the chapters are not being revealed in order, neither are the verses within the chapters being revealed in order, and the chapters are being revealed simultaneously.
Yes, and of course the other explanation is that he's making it up as he goes along.
Then you have Professor Raymond Farrin, who talks about the concentric patterns, parallelism, chiasm within the text.
And you know, you can find all of these in other books as well.
But
you can find patterns in all kinds of books if you look hard enough.
You're still not willing to yield. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I've not been stuck on it. You know,
to be honest, I don't really get time to watch virtually anybody's channel, to be honest. How's your channel doing now? How many subscribers do you have? And is it building up slowly? I don't know. Well, you know, it's a start, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't really do the religious stuff.
Okay.
It's mainly the science denial, anti-evolution stuff.
Okay.
Support that I react to.
Okay. So what? Yeah, he is. Yeah. You don't mind, do you?
Oh no, I don't mind. Sorry. Yeah.
So what is the main stickler for you in terms of not accepting religion? Because you've come up with lots of things before, and I think some of those we discussed that they don't necessarily inherently those points themselves disprove the existence of God.
No, it's not my job to disprove them.
Right.
Because the claim, the person who makes the claim has to say that it has to provide sufficient evidence that there is one.
But would you accept that? So I understand the argument that you pose. But would you say that it's fair to say that even the atheist is actually positing a claim? And that claim is that it has to be a naturalistic explanation. It can't actually be God. Now, I'll tell you why I say that. Because there are two ways of, I feel, yes, coming over this side. Okay, no problem. Bad lighting, is it? Or we need to get better lighting. He wants his Hassan's better side. So why I say they're making a claim as well is that when we posit hard atheism, what it's actually saying is that there has to be a naturalistic explanation, and there can't be a metaphysical explanation. So that in itself is a claim, I think.
That is a claim, yeah.
Right. The other thing is, the reason why I feel that it is a claim is that there are two ways of arriving at truth, I think. One is analytical and empirical, overwhelming evidence for something.
Yeah.
The other is when one studies all the alternatives and one exhausts all the alternatives, and if that's the only rational or logical conclusion left, then I would say, though you might argue it's not as weighty as analytical and empirical first-hand evidence, I would say nevertheless it's a deductive set of arguments that arrive at certainty that, well, the only explanation has to be some form of entity, powerful, creative, and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that, but you'd have to exclude all of them, and then even then it's not like a pure deductive argument, because you haven't got to make sure that you've excluded every single natural.
Well, I think that you have, but please go ahead. Sorry, I've interrupted.
Yeah, sorry. So you're just saying that, because something like a methodological naturalism, so
yes.
the is we can't test for the supernatural.
Yes.
So until you can find a way of testing for the supernatural, then you can't include the supernatural in any like, logical program or causation.
Yeah. But I think there's an assumption there. The assumption is that there should be a scientific paradigm or principle, or within our scientific paradigm of observation, experimentation, repeatability, and everything else, to discover the supernatural.
Yeah.
And that's an assumption. It doesn't necessarily have to be so.
No,
Do you agree? Yeah.
I understand.
So what I'm saying is that if one makes that assumption, then I believe that you're setting yourself up to fail from the beginning. And the reason why I say that is because from a theistic point of view, from a doctrine of religion, but inherently that is not something that is scientifically provable, because it's not in the observable realm of our abilities, let's say, right?
And
sorry.
How I would respond to that is, if we don't find it, I might understand by the way. If we don't see, then I think that's the fault of the supernatural entities for not making themselves clear.
Right. So I would say that's another assumption. And the assumption there is that if an entity like God exists, then the assumption is that he would make his evidence so profound that there would be no way that anybody would actually deny it.
If that God wants to be worshipped,
right? Yeah. Okay. If that God wants to be worshipped,
yes,
then that God would.
The onus is on the God to provide evidence for itself.
Right.
If it wants people to follow.
And I would say that's another assumption, which is that the assumption is that God would, if he wanted to be worshipped, or if he ordained us to worship him, that the evidence should be overwhelming to the extent where it would be undeniable. In fact, there would be no choice in the matter, basically. The person would be compelled to have to accept there's no choice in that.
Well, yeah, as in you'd be compelled to know that the God exists.
Right.
So you don't have to worship it.
Yes.
So you can't claim that God doesn't exist.
Yes. So I would say, respectfully, I would say that's another assumption.
Okay, yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that, you see, what I'm trying to sort of bring to the table is that it is true the theist is coming with assumptions as well. There's no doubt about that. But I think that this point of intellectual superiority from the atheist, that actually we're being very analytical, very empirical, we're being very neutral in our assumptions, I think that's not actually fair or just or correct. I think that they are also coming with their assumptions, and two of them that I've said is that one, God, if God exists, would make his presence so undeniable that human beings would believe in him. That I think that is an assumption they come with. And the second one, which is I've said to you, that if God wanted to be worshipped, again, he would make it so apparent that there would be actually no free will, no choice in the matter. People just would be compelled to do so, right?
But do you think there is an onus on the supernatural to provide evidence for themselves?
Well, that depends now. And I'll tell you what it depends on. It depends upon the one who set the rules for the game, as it were. Let's say the game of life, the game of creation. I don't mean it as a game as in a pejorative sense. I'm just saying from our perspective, right? So it depends upon the creator choosing the rules that he has set for humankind. Now, if those rules are everyone will believe, then Allah addresses that in the Quran. Had we wished, everyone would have believed. But in other words, Allah is telling us that that's not what I wished. That is not the game. Those are not the rules of the game. And then Allah specifies the rules of the game. That I will give you signs from within yourselves and from the furthest horizons.
You have to interpret those signs.
Of course you do. There's always a level of interpretation.
You need to interpret it if the God was made itself.
Just as you would interpret science. Even analytical and empirical science has a realm of interpretation, right? So as human beings, there's always going to be that we can't escape that, basically.
But that wouldn't be needed if the God showed himself.
But you see, but that's the point. You see, Hassan, the point is that saying the rules should be how I perceive them to be best.
Okay.
How I perceive them to be as they should be. I think this is, respectfully, I would say this is a bit arrogant. Because what it's saying is that my perceptions as an individual are somehow absolute. They can't be wrong. They cannot be questioned. What I'm saying, well, I'm saying when you come with that stance, you see, there's an element of surety that it has to be this way, otherwise God doesn't exist. Is a sort of an insistence on something that in reality doesn't have to be that way.
No, what I'm just saying is if you want us to believe, then there needs to be much smaller room for doubt.
But if that belief is something that the rules of the game are that God wishes an individual to have overwhelming evidence from God's perspective, not from our perspective, yet still leave them enough free will to make that decision. To believe or not to believe. All right? Now, one of the things that I would say is that I think that the concept of belief is something actually intrinsic within our very psyche, our very nature.
Is this
Fitra, I would say. And I would say there's some data to support that. You
Yeah,
may disagree.
I would argue that. I
You
mean,
may
it's-
disagree with
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but I would say that the study by, I think, Daniel Bennett,
Daniel, I mean, there were some studies that people
in Oxford University.
what that showed was that people tend to, especially in children, they tend to find that they look for an agency cause for
Yes.
something
higher than themselves.
Exactly, so like when they see a rock
Yes.
on the beach, they're not going to think it was blown in.
Yes.
They're going to think somebody
So
put there.
cause and effect, basically.
Yeah, but they tend to put an agency
Yes,
to
behind
that. That's what it shows.
Yes, yeah. So, and of course, if you extrapolate the universe, extrapolate
Yeah.
the greater existence, then
Yeah, and then
the
you're
greater the cause for that, right? Now, the other thing that they somehow intrinsically seem to possess is this aspect of justice. So if you give one and a half year old a cookie,
Yeah.
and you don't give it to the other one, that one
Yeah.
it cries. It sort of
I've seen-
recognises
yes.
that's wrong, right?
I've seen that in
What
monkeys as well.
right?
So,
Yeah, right.
So
So
they have a sense of fairness, yeah.
so we believe that there are some things that are intrinsic within the human fabric of existence, whether you say soul, the qalb, the spiritual heart, whatever it might be.
Sure. I mean, I won't argue that there are things that are intrinsic
Yeah.
within us. I wouldn't put that down to
Yeah.
we've been our programming by a god.
I understand.
Or something.
No,
I'll-
we may disagree as to the
Yeah.
cause of that, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that, therefore, I think that atheism is something that is conditioned to the individual afterwards.
Okay.
But the natural predisposition actually is to accept this entity, this higher cause, this cause of everything. That's what I would argue. And I think the data seems to support that too. And so when a person says, often they say to me, proof,
Yeah.
I would say actually the Quranic verse is actually quite compelling, that from within yourselves and from in the furthest horizons, if you actually sit and contemplate, that you will actually, I think personally, that you will at least arrive at a conclusion that there has to be some sort of necessary existence underpinning all existence.
We can certainly argue about that. There's some fundamental essence
Yes.
to the universe,
Yes.
and I don't, I've explored that, and I didn't get anything beyond that.
Okay.
Certainly, you haven't even, because you have to get from there to deism, and then from deism.
No,
to
I understand
theism.
that, but
So-
have you yourself arrived at that conclusion that there has to be something that has always existed?
Well, what I see is probably something has always existed, something like matter and energy,
Like,
or
whatever that
something
might be.
like that. Yeah.
So something has always
Yeah,
existed.
outside of time, something may have
Outside of
existed
time,
and-
space, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you see, I think our beliefs on that aspect are fairly aligned. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Obviously, now the question arises as to the explanation of what that existence might
Sure,
be.
sure.
Yeah. Now, obviously, from your point of view, and please, I'm explaining what you believe, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. That existence of that necessary existence of energy, matter, whatever it might be, is something that doesn't require an explanation, because it is in itself its own explanation.
Yeah.
There's no explanation outside of it, right?
Yeah. It's just as in we're talking about the fundamental.
And that everything that has come into existence has proceeded from that existence.
What's it proceeded from?
We have a Christian
unfortunately,
friend.
they're
Guys,
not
if you
right.
don't mind, we've got cameras
camera here.
Please,
Oh, sorry.
Please, yeah, thank you.
I mean, you could say that. Yeah. If
sorry,
we say that
sorry.
everything is, if you're positing the first clause,
Just 1 second.
then if,
Sheikh,
Are you ashamed of your mother?
Sheikh, can we just Jazakallah khair, thank you. So,
yeah, so
sorry,
we
got
no, that's all right. That's
lost
okay,
it.
Abbas,
It
yeah.
can become a bit of a circus here.
It is, yeah. So I'm always saying, we can both agree that there must be some sort of first clause.
Right.
But then,
It's reasonable,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now, of course, the only way really for us to find out about this first cause would be obviously two ways. One is that at our disposal we have the scientific method,
Yes.
but a necessary existence by definition is outside of science because matter and energy always require an explanation. They're contingent.
No.
Well, let me ask you
Go on,
something.
then.
If they are contingent, i.e. that they possess certain qualities and certain elements which are assembled in a particular way, and they could have been assembled,
this is
they
the
could have been
contingency
assembled
argument,
differently.
yeah.
Yeah, you understand my point? I think it's reasonable to assume that it requires an explanation. Now, you might say, no, I'm happy for there not to be an explanation, but I would posit that that's more of a cop-out than a reasonable position.
I would postulate that you need to demonstrate that it is contingent in the first place and not just go by assumptions, because we're talking about things that are outside of our universe. We only know things that are... Sorry. Yeah, we only know what's in our own time and space and then what we can test. So you're talking outside of this. So what matter and energy is outside, you can't say it's contingent. It can only be a certain way. These are all things that you can't just be sure of.
So in reality, we agree upon that point as well then.
Okay.
That first cause
Yeah.
is not contingent,
Yeah.
not reliant
We can
on
agree on
anything,
that, yeah.
and it is the explanation for itself, doesn't require an explanation outside of itself.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the other thing I would posit to you then
Sure.
is, if we have agreed that every existence comes from this necessary first cause, this existence,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the question: does it require a will, a decision-making function to bring things into existence when it chooses to do so?
Well, because you're saying it chooses,
Yes,
so you're saying you're
A
presupposing something.
consciousness, a decision.
If it has a conscience, then yes, but that doesn't necessarily
Okay, so
correlate that there
are
is.
you saying that it could not have any consciousness?
It doesn't need to have any consciousness.
Doesn't need to have- okay.
any will.
No will.
It
Okay,
could just be following natural processes.
Okay.
It's like a volcano erupting.
I understand. Like a domino.
Yeah.
One domino falls, all of the other dominoes fall.
Yeah.
Nothing is in control of anything else, and that first domino falling, in itself, is not a decision, just a natural function of the necessary existence that existed.
Yeah.
Right?
What had happened before and stuff. Yeah.
So now let's have a look at the necessary existence that brings from it emanates or emulates all existences,
Okay.
and it has an infinite past
Okay.
to bring every existence.
Why infinite past? 'Cause
Well,
it's the
it would,
first.
if it's the first cause, it has to infinitely exist.
Okay. But you remember, we're outside of time. Remember,
Yeah, but our universe might be outside of time.
our universe is in time. We're talking outside of you.
I understand,
outside of time.
and this first existence is from it comes all existences.
Including
It can't
time,
be
yeah.
bound to time.
Yeah.
Because it's always existed.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's reasonable to say that it existed post-infinite, pre-infinite. It doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an end necessarily, right? Because if it did have an end, then it's already had an infinite time to die out or to be exhausted or to be, right? So it's infinite in both directions, right? Now, if every step that emulated from this or that was emitted from this
You cannot defend
Sorry.
your religion.
Can you-
Had-
you had a sheikh in here.
had an
pulling
infinite
a Christian woman.
amount
and when
of
a man
time,
comes
infinite
to
amount of
challenge
time.
him, he
Sorry, I
runs
can't hear
away.
you.
I know.
Can you
Because
go
your
away? We're
religion
talking.
only
Do you
works
mind?
When you bully women, when you put
Sorry.
workers in them, when you cover them, lock them up,
Okay.
and when it comes
Well,
to
we've got a
Christian
discussion.
men, you can't defend
We're having
it.
a discussion.
It's a misogynistic religion. It's a false religion. That's why you were telling him
Show
to run
good Christian
away.
manners.
Just
Show good Christian manners, and let us have a
we're having a
conversation.
conversation.
You can go and
It's fine.
scream
Look,
and
you've got
shout
the whole
and
of the
say,
park
I
over
don't wish to
there.
talk to you. Do you mind?
Love the enemy.
Then
Yeah.
don't speak to me
Look.
either.
Okay, well then don't shout in my cameras.
You've just got the whole park over there.
Just
It's
ignore her.
okay. Thank you, brother. Okay, so
In Islam,
my
women
argument
have no
is,
rights.
my
There is
argument
no
is,
truth in Islam.
my argument is
That's why he wants to address
that
the
if
fact
it
that
had
your
an
Quran mentions
infinite
more than
amount of
50
time,
times that you need to read the Torah
then
and
it's
the gospel.
reasonable to
You say
expect
Torah, the Quran doesn't say
every
that.
possible,
you cannot produce an alternative. Your
action
Quran says
that
you
could
need to
have
read
come
the gospel
out
and you read it to
of
Muslims.
this
Possible,
necessary existence
If
would
it's
have already
possible.
come into
You
existence.
can't answer
It's
this.
possible, yeah.
Correct? Would
Yeah,
that
I
be
can see
reasonable?
that. I can see that, yeah.
But our universe came into existence 14.3 billion years ago.
We'll see if
Yeah,
the Sheikh comes back.
13.8, yeah.
He won't
13.8,
come
sorry,
back.
billion
He won't
years ago.
come back because there is no
That will
truth
just
in this.
prove.
Therefore, there could not have been an infinite amount of time for it to come into existence from merely a domino effect falling,
Why not?
because it came into existence 14.8 billion years ago.
Yeah, but time started at that point.
For us.
Yes, for us, yeah.
Exactly. Not for the necessary
But you
existence.
don't know what happened before then. You don't know what the alternatives were.
But my
whether-
point-
how
my-
many
that's-
multiverses
I
are.
understand, but
whatever,
Hassan, my point is, I think, quite succinct. In so much as if every action has an infinite amount of time to come into existence or to be activated, then it's reasonable that every action has already had an infinite amount of time for all of those dominoes to have fallen.
every possible action.
Every possible action. So if we do see a beginning for something,
which can include
Which is our
pedophilia.
universe.
that seems reasonable that whatever this first cause
Do you agree
was,
with this?
had a conscious decision to bring it into existence at a particular time. You don't think?
No, no, because if you're saying if you say there were 100 possible outcomes,
Yeah.
we could have been 64 or something like that out of a possible 100, because anything that was happening outside of our local presentation of space and time. So that doesn't suggest any conscious activity, any conscious will behind it.
I would humbly disagree,
Fine, okay.
and I'll tell you why.
Go on then.
Because I think, as I said to you,
Yeah.
how would we know about the necessary existence, since in reality it becomes a philosophical discussion,
Yeah.
not a scientific
I
one.
can say
Yeah,
whatever
some
I
things are
want to.
philosophical, yeah.
But I agree,
I
right?
can. What
Now,
are you going to do about
I think
I'm talking to the crowd.
now I think that
I can do whatever I want.
since the
to
first
do.
cause we have
Are
agreed
you speaking to
Yeah.
me?
existed eternally, and we've agreed that the functions of all reactions from the first
Do you know
cause
why you wear hijab?
were
It's because
not
if you
controlled.
don't wear it, you're a sex slave.
Do you
That's
mind?
what
Do you
Muhammad
mind?
said.
You're being abusive.
That's why.
You're being abusive.
We've got to
Can you
Abusing
please go
Muslim.
away? Can you go away?
You wear a hijab.
Can you go
because
away?
If you don't wear it,
Can you
you're
go
considered
away?
to be a sex slave.
Sorry,
Do you
wait.
know this, sir? You know this,
Just-
madam?
No manners. You have no
Excuse
manners
me.
Do you know
whatsoever.
this, madam?
Guys,
Absolutely no manners whatsoever.
we're recording a discussion, and you're just standing in the way of the camera. Just
This is what they unfortunately are now
Are you
limited
gonna
to.
answer?
have a discussion over there.
I would like you to. I don't talk to ignorant people. Go away.
I can talk to the crowd in here.
I can understand why
I can
people.
talk to the crowd in here.
I can understand why people run away from people of religion, especially when it's people like yourself. In any case,
So
I think it's a reasonable
I
argument.
can understand your argument about
That
that.
is, do you understand my argument?
I do understand your
The other thing is that in our universe,
I can do what I want if I want to.
I think the only way for us
Be
to
quiet. Women should not
No,
talk.
that's what
Differentiate.
The Bible says
Differentiate
women should
between-
not talk.
No, it's okay. Let's carry on.
Can we move over there?
That's why Muslim countries, your woman cannot go out on
Shall I interrupt
her
her
own. She needs a guardian because if
shall we
something
leave it with
happens
Let's
to
leave her, leave her.
it's going to be her fault. And this is what
Let
you
dogs
preach.
bark. It's better. Let the dogs bark.
They don't bark because
So
you
I would
can't
say,
defend your
as I-
religion.
quite
No
humbly,
women
Sure.
would defend this
is that
religion
if you
because it's
contemplate
evil.
on these
It's
things,
an evil religion.
I think the more reasonable position.
Hello, my friend, don't
I
speak
think,
to her.
I think the more reasonable.
Let's just
Don't
go.
talk to her.
Let
Perfect.
you
Your
talk.
religion's perfect. Can you go now?
I think the more reasonable position actually is that whatever this first course was, it brought our universe 13.8 million years ago.
Yeah, we can agree.
I think that to me indicates that it's not just a domino effect, infinite. I think the other thing that's interesting is that how can we establish if this
Why
first
do women
course,
wear hijab?
if this first course,
Can I tell you why women wear
I
hijab?
can't even have a discussion.
You don't want to hear the truth about it.
You're making
You don't want to hear the truth because the truth scares you. The reason why women wear a hijab
We can talk,
yeah.
is because
So let's carry on. So yeah, I can see your point, but I'm not convinced that there is any reason why there had to be a conscious will. I can't see that. And if you, let's just say there was a
there had to be a what?
there didn't need to be a conscious will. Let's assume there was a conscious will.
You think they're happy to be there?
That could just be the end. The conscious will could have said,
They
let's
don't
start the
get any
universe,
sunshine.
fix the fingers,
This is an
then
evil
that's it.
ideology,
There's
and I
nothing
will
to
speak
suggest
against it.
anything
And you
else is
cannot
carried on.
defend it. None
Look,
of you can defend
we're having a
it.
conversation, all right?
Just ignore her.
Go and tell the police.
I'm not saying there's no crime. We're just having a conversation.
Is that what Christians need to be learning
Look,
manners?
you've got the whole
You need
part.
the police.
Hijab,
You need the police to be taught
Why,
manners.
why do women wear
Didn't your mum
hijab?
teach you manners?
You've got the
Why
whole
do women
part.
wear
Didn't your
hijab?
mum and dad
You
teach you
can't
manners?
answer. Notice
Huh?
that they can't defend
You need the
the
police
religion.
to teach you manners.
Notice that they can't defend the religion.
Ridiculous.
Don't wear
Absolutely
clothes. We
ridiculous.
don't need clothes.
You got no manners at all.
Anyway.
We don't need clothes. خلاص.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you okay with having
Anyway.
sex slaves?
Is there
sir?
much-
No, we treat our women as diamonds. They have
No,
to be
and what
covered.
about
Anyway,
the sex slaves?
so
Decency in
Hassan,
that.
what I would say to you is that
no, it says
if
in
we
here
accept that is
it's
a
woman,
one
that
of the
is a woman
reasonable
that wear
possibilities,
hijab, she's a sex slave.
we can then, I think, investigate as to whether
Oh,
this
really?
entity, if
Oh,
it
yeah.
exists,
Oh, yeah.
has
A woman
somehow
wears-
contacted us in some way
Right, a
to
woman
make
has
us
to wear
aware
hijab because
of what
she
this
would
entity
be
is
a Muslim woman.
and what
She
is
doesn't
expected-
wear
what is
hijab,
expected
she's a
from
sex
us.
slave. That's what
If
it
he wants
says in
anything
here.
from us, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that if you look at, for
Are you gonna
example,
read it?
that poster
Then
there.
what is that? We should be one of the
Which is totally unfalsifiable.
Well, no, it's not.
It is.
And I'll tell you why it's not.
It's subjective and totally unfalsifiable.
I'll tell you why it's not.
You wear it.
I think that there are things within it
Woman says
that in reality, if a linguist, somebody who is an expert of classical Arabic language, and there are many non-Muslims, quite frankly, and that when they look at that, they realise that the very composition itself is impossible for. Yeah.
But anyway, even if you have, yeah. So
So okay.
we're talking about that. Though.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, I think you can get some. Yeah, all right. You can look at, say, a work of fiction, literary work of fiction, and you can make up those same criteria. But even if you've never found something like it, firstly, that doesn't mean that the original was from a god. And secondly, it's subjective because there are subjective claims in there saying, oh, it has to have had this profound significance or something like this. I could find
the most profound choice of words.
something like that,
Yeah.
which is subjective. I mean, I could get the world's best artist, get him to make a painting, and then I can put him in a dungeon, and I can show this painting, and I can say to people, this was painted by God. If you don't believe me, make a painting that's like it, and nobody will be able to
Or
do
better it, equal to it, or better it.
Yes, and that would, but then even if nobody could equal or better it, that wouldn't necessarily mean that the original.
No, look. So the examples that you've provided,
Yeah.
I would accept
Okay.
that would be the case, right? And the reason why I would accept that
Sure.
is that we recognise those things, paintings and
Yeah.
sculptures or whatever,
And books.
and books, for example, in a very different way, right? From Revelation, I think it's very different. And I'll tell you why.
Okay. Well, Revelation is subject. Well,
Of course,
that's arbitrary. We're not.
But I'll
agreeing on
tell you why. On the one side, a painting from our own experience is truly a very subjective thing, even amongst the specialists or the experts
So is a book.
in painting.
So is a book.
No, but let me just get to the point.
Okay.
So, for example, if an artist did make that claim, they would be almost immediately mass disagreements within artists themselves who would pick other paintings to be either superior or equal to. You understand my point?
Yeah.
Now, why I believe that this argument is a lot stronger
Yeah.
and it's very different is that we have had and have linguists who are familiar with the Arabic language and the Quranic classical Arabic language, and have actually said that this is a unique way of even writing the language itself. Even the grammar itself is unique to the Quran. It didn't exist prior to, and it has never been able to be duplicated.
Wow.
We have linguists themselves who are saying that the very words of Muhammad, peace be upon him,
Yeah. Carry on.
and the Quranic Arabic are unique, they're different.
Yeah.
The language is different from the language of the Arabs at the time.
Yeah.
Yet it uses the same letters and the same words, and in some cases comes up with a different word with actually a more eloquent way of explaining. So it comes with new words, in fact.
Exactly.
Right?
Although, I mean, you can say this, look, how the Quran resembles pre-Islamic poetry.
Yes.
Was the Quran plagiarized from others?
Yeah, of course.
You
We can look at these claims.
There are
right?
people who make the claims.
Of course they do.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not saying that people don't make the claim.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that the only way of ascertaining whether those claims are actually, they hold any weight,
Yeah.
is that you would at least get some consensus within academia themselves. They wouldn't be fringe opinions.
Well, I wouldn't say that these ones are fringe
Well,
opinions, but
from what
you know,
my investigation,
these
from what
are
I did,
ex-Muslims
please,
as well,
please
they
do
say.
send them to me.
Sure.
But from
I mean,
my,
you can easily Google
of course,
it. From
yeah.
Abdul Els.
Yeah, not a problem at all, right?
But
So,
certainly you can have a look
so
at those
for
and-
example, I would look at non-Muslim academics on the subject, like Professor Angelica Newith
Did she
and
convert to
others.
Islam?
No, of course not.
Well, then maybe it wasn't that
No,
convincing.
no, but look, the point I'm trying to make to you here is this.
Yeah.
There are many people who saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, themselves.
Yeah.
Many who didn't
Okay.
accept Islam,
Yeah.
despite seeing what we would argue is the miracle of the Quran. And by the way, agreeing
Yeah.
that it was outside the capacity of human beings and still not accepting the Quran
Well,
or accepting
if
Islam.
they thought that, yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, okay, but surely a God would make it so that it's
well, that's
it's not
again,
ambiguous.
What I'm saying,
Unambiguous.
what I'm saying is that, look, for me, I don't believe it is ambiguous,
Okay.
and that's perhaps because I've, in a very non-academic way, let's say,
Yeah.
I've studied it to some extent, and for me, it's actually quite overwhelming.
Okay.
The claim that it's being made in terms of its uniqueness, its structure, the language
Which is
itself
a
being
very
unique,
subjective claim, yeah.
Look, to some extent, I would say, to some extent, there is going to be a level of subjectivity in terms of how you personally interpret something.
Yes.
But where that subjectivity is reduced is when you start getting mass consensus of people who agree to a particular, a conclusion about something. And by the way, I'm not just talking about Muslims here. I'm talking about non-Muslims as well. And look, we all operate by balance of probability. Let's be honest,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if we have an overwhelming consensus, including non-Muslim consensus, I think the argument becomes much more robust and forceful than if it is just, a bunch of Muslims saying something. I think the manner in which the Quran is revealed, for me,
Yeah.
is outside the capacity of human, what you would expect from a human being as well.
I don't think. Well, I would disagree. But of
I'll
course
explain
can
to you
think-
why I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's all the revelations which are. I'm trying to think of the word now. Convenient. The convenient revelations which just come at the right time.
Yeah.
Very self-serving ones. The ones that only apply to Muhammad's wives.
Well, okay, let's
and,
look.
you know,
But
all
let's
of
look
this.
at that.
Okay. So, sure, we'll be able
Not
to
a
talk
problem.
about
Look, the Quran we know through the testimony of many thousands of companions was revealed over 23 years, from
Okay.
40 to 63.
that. Yeah.
The revelation came down often consequential. So an event unfolds,
Yeah.
or somebody asks a question,
Yeah.
and a few verses are revealed.
Yeah. That's your explanation.
That's our explanation.
Yeah.
And of course, the way that we establish that explanation to hold any credence
Yeah.
is the way that we would justify anything that has happened in history, which is valid, multiple, testable, testimony.
Sure.
Right? So how do we know about Christopher Columbus? How do we know about, President Lincoln? Or if we even go back further, how do we know about any of these people and what they did? Of course, it would be multiple. Yeah, multiple.
None of them were supernatural claims.
I agree, but I'm saying our ability to become sure or very confident about those historical events is based upon multiple attested or testable testimony. That's how we effectively weigh up evidence from history, right? So that's how we would arrive at that conclusion. Now, what we have is over nearly 80,000 words being revealed over 23 years, often consequential, where the chapters are not being revealed in order, neither are the verses within the chapters being revealed in order, and the chapters are being revealed simultaneously.
Yes, and of course the other explanation is that he's making it up as he goes along.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But look, that's one logical possibility.
Yeah.
So one logical possibility would be that he already has some rough structure in his mind, and then somebody comes and asks the question. He says, "Okay, these verses are from God. Those verses are from God." Right?
Yeah.
That's one logical explanation.
Yes.
I would say it's not tenable on the basis that there's no editorial process and no mushaf, no book at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
It was all memorized. Yes.
All memorized. The companions are memorizing, and the Prophet himself is memorizing. Not just in one mode, but in 7 different modes of transmission.
Sure.
And all 7 are memorized by the Prophet and some of the companions, right? Now, there are 2 or 3 important factors here. Number 1, some of the companions are not memorizing the entire Quran, and they're already departing from the Middle East onto their journeys, whether it's to spread Islam or they're going back to their homes or whatever it might be.
Okay.
That's one thing. The other thing is, at the end of the revelation of 23 years, you have one coherent reading. You know that when you hear the Quran, you hear this rhythm or the rhyme of the Quran, and how it changes. Yes, and you have that consistency, despite these verses being revealed over 23 years, no editorial process, and the verses, the up to 80,000 words, being what would be perceived by the onlooker to be somewhat random, because you can't plan on an event happening in front of you, or a war breaking out when it actually does, or an event within the war, or somebody coming and asking you a question, whether it's a believer or even a disbeliever.
We don't know what's going to happen in the future then.
Right, okay. Now, within that book, you have that structure.
Okay.
Within that book, you have Professor Raymond Farin.
Which is all retrospective anyway.
Okay, it's something that, obviously, when the book is complete, that you can then come to some of those conclusions. Some of them would have already been arrived at.
I still think it's subjective and it's retrospective.
Then you have Professor Raymond Farin, who talks about the concentric patterns, parallelism, chiasm within the text.
And you can find all of these in other books as well.
But
you can find patterns in all kinds of books if you look hard enough.
Yes, in some books you can find some patterns, but I would argue the complexity of what Raymond Farin says about the Quran, in terms of concentric within concentric within concentric patterns, the reason why he became Muslim is he said that the revelation revealed in this way, in his view, and you could argue that's subjective, but he came to the conclusion that that is outside the capacity of what you would expect a human being to be able to come up with.
Okay.
You understand my point?
Yeah,
so what I'm saying to you, Hassan, is that there are many layers, not just one layer, which I believe actually are profound. Now, within that book, you have prophecies of things that will come.
Okay.
And some of those prophecies are counterintuitive. In other words, of course, you would expect that not to happen, but the Quran makes a claim that, in fact, this will happen. And I believe that a liar or somebody that's just making up a text can only do that in two ways.
Yeah.
Number one, he applies that information after the event has happened.
Yes. Yeah. Or he says vague things.
Or he says vague things that actually have no solid grounding.
He throws out all kinds of prophecies, some
that
of which
are not really specific.
Only a couple come true, yeah.
Right.
Go on.
You agree, right?
Yeah, I know those.
But you would also expect that he would probably make mistakes when he's doing these type of prophecies,
Sure.
right? Now, you don't find any of that in the Quran.
Really?
No? No. And by all means, please do come back to me.
Sure. I mean, of course, you can. I mean, you can just easily look up mistakes in the Quran, and there'll be loads there.
Not a problem at all.
Okay. So have a look. Anyway,
I have, right?
All right.
Now
there are plenty of that. All you need to do is just Google it, and you get long lists.
Look, I'll tell you what I've looked at when I've seen these people come up with these arguments.
Yeah.
I found.
I'll need to get the train soon.
Not a problem. We'll finish up our conversation.
Yeah.
I found 2 or 3 things very, let's say, common in these arguments.
Sure.
Number one is the linguistic ability of the individual to decipher the text is often faulty. Not always, but often faulty. Number two, they often look at an explanation that the general consensus of scholars have never agreed with. So it's a fringe opinion. And so, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's a little bit more sinister than that, where they're literally imputing things into the text that nobody's ever agreed upon saying.
Sure.
That's my experience.
Okay,
but if you have any new ones, you've got our email address, right?
Yeah, got email
now,
address.
there are so many other layers that, inshallah, we can discuss maybe next time.
Yeah,
but
next time I'll come
what
round
I'm saying to you, Hassan, is that it's, for me, being a Muslim is all of these layers of evidence. I think they become so profound that if I use a fair assessment, which is balance of probability, is it more likely to be true or more likely to be false? If I'm overwhelmingly convinced that the weight is sufficient and heavy enough to accept it, then I think you would accept that it's a reasonable position to have, right?
I can see if you're that way inclined to believe in these things, then you could convince yourself of that.
So that's what I'd like you to contemplate on and think about.
I understand.
And come onto our streams and we'll have more of a conversation.
I'll try.
Because I think with
I'll
the
try
doctor,
and come here and more.
with
Nice
Doctor and me, I think you'll find that we don't tend to sort of bash you too much, right? We tend to have a bit of a nice discussion.
I'll try and be here more often.
And you're a nice guy, and I actually like talking to you.
It's nice talking to you as well.
Yeah.
Great. Anyway,
I'm sure you have got a Quran, and I'm sure that you have.
Yeah, it's right.
You have read it.
I can find all the information.
You know, one of the things before you go, Hassan, I would say to you is that sometimes it's better to first look at the evidences for something than the evidences against something. And I'll tell you why. Because often the evidences against something may be accurate or inaccurate.
Yeah.
And sometimes our perception or our fundamental, let's say, foundational baggage that we come into the discussion with is very anti-religion and anti-Islam or whatever. And so even weak arguments seem very fair and reasonable to us. Do you see my point?
Yeah, but sometimes the evidence for something can also be unbalanced and weak as well.
Of course, and that's where Allah says very clearly in the Quran, if you speak the truth, provide your evidence. Let's base it upon the evidence, Anyway, look, we're going to catch a train. How far are you? Are you quite far out? Or?
Yeah, Midlands.
Oh, right, okay, so it's a long way for you to go. Very nice to talk to you, Hassan.
Good to see you in person.
All right, see you later.